And that no one relates to that. That's ASX type stuff. But yeah, I just sort of looked at the spreadsheet and go, I'm making more in property, even at this early stage, than my corporate job. And I'm investing 60 plus hours a week into this corporate job. I'm putting 5 hours a week into this. So it's a no-brainer. I just followed the numbers.
And most people start off in residential, right? I've started off in residential. Obviously, you guys have started off in residential, and so have you, Mark, right? What made the change going instead of, just continuing residential like everybody else does, and going into commercial? Because commercial really is, I guess it's a bit scary for people, right? Because it's a lot easier going, all right, let me buy a house. I know there's plenty of people that need to rent it. Usually you can get into it for a little bit cheaper than a commercial property. You always hear the scary stories of, commercial tenancies being vacant for long periods of time and people not paying their rent. And then you got to lock them out. And then you got this full factory full of stuff that you got to get rid of and put it on Gumtree and Facebook Marketplace and all this type of thing. So where did that transition come from residential to commercial? Because there's a lot of people that listen to this that are first-time investors, are looking to invest, and majority are probably residential investors, thinking about getting into commercial.
It's a really topical question. So this is quite important to this day and age right now, because my situation back then with the unit blocks, I was onto a winning streak. I was like, there was margin, like you were buying 8%, well, 8 to 10% gross yielding properties. You shave off all the outgoings, you're sitting at 6-7% net. The mortgages back then were probably in the fives, low fives. So there's a 2% margin on the debt for a unit block. Now those same unit blocks, because of all the capital growth they've had and the rent growth hasn't kept up, they're probably like 6% gross. Now they're at 4% net, probably 3.5% to be fair, because you've got to put real maintenance in there and stuff like that. And then your mortgage rate's 6.5. It does not stack. I worked out back then, and now that stacks a whole lot worse now. So anyone that's still pumping that strategy is simply ignoring cash flow. They're going for a different strategy, which is hopefully it keeps growing at the same rate. I'm sure some places will, some places won't, but the return on investment is going to be a lot lower. Commercial, just stumbled upon that one deal. I was looking for over 12 months, so didn't stumble on it. I was like literally had spreadsheets of hundreds of properties and comparing them and trying to pick which one to go. But it was a 9% net versus a 5% interest rate. There was a 4% margin on the deal, 2 5-year leases, recession-proof type tenants. Like everyone's going to go to a supermarket, the fish and chip shop, survived Perth for 35 years through their ups and downs. So whatever Perth has coming up, that people are still going to eat fish and chips, I guess. So I even did the DD on like, how old's the guy? Yeah, they got a succession plan. What's the business worth? What's the multiple of these things going? Like there's an asset in their business itself. And that's what I delved into and thought, all right, well, it's not as scary as some of the assumptions you've just mentioned. Yeah. Because if you get commercial wrong, everything you mentioned is perfectly right. You're going to get screwed. You're going to lose your tenant. You're going to have 6 months vacancy. If you pick the wrong asset, it's going to get scary pretty quick. So you got to do your due diligence and pick the right ones.
Yeah. And that's a key, right? And we'll dig into that deeper. What does due diligence mean? Because we throw this word around, but due diligence means work, right? And what type of work and what you need to be looking at. But can you explain to the audience the difference between residential and commercial, just in regards to the expenses that you incur on a residential property versus the expenses that you incur on a commercial property, and who pays what?
Yeah. So high level, when you look at residential property, everyone quotes gross yields. So, 5% gross. What does that mean? You just get the rent, but then you got to pay your insurance, your maintenance, your council rates, all of the above. There's a lot of expenses. And then you got to, factor that. So that might minus your outgoing. There might be 2.5% off your net figures. So when you see 5% gross, it's really 2.5 to 3% net, depending on an asset. If it's strata, it's even worse. Commercial, the tenants pay for things like land tax. Not every lease, but even if they're not paying for it, you always work it back to a net figure and then adjust the price when you offer. So generally leases, there's two types, a gross lease and a net lease. A gross lease means they pay you more upfront to account for the outgoings. A net lease means you literally send the bill to the tenant, or even if you pay it and then they pay you in arrears the next month, but they pay insurance, land tax, property management in many cases. A lot of people are surprised by that one. There's a maintenance allowance in there. Capital work's not included because that's considered improving the building. Basically, everything to do with operating the building. And your job as a landlord is to provide, the asset in a usable condition. So it can't, like if it's leaking, you got to fix it, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. If you're not, you might be liable to, they cannot pay your rent if it's like, let's say it's flooded. We don't buy flood properties, but, there'd be a period of a week or so where you can't charge rent.
Yeah.
So
there's so many pros and cons to each. Like just off camera, when Scott just came into the studio, I was literally like, just give me a sec, because I was literally texting because our property manager at one of our properties, there's like emergency. There's a water heater that's leaking very badly. They've had to turn it off. Had the plumber go out there. They want $2,700 for a new, water heater plus $250 for the electrician to go out. And I'm just like, just hold off. I rang my plumber, man. Hey, can you go check this out and, make sure it can be fixed, or what can we do? Whereas, commercial property, the tenant that I have in one of them, I don't hear from him. Like I legit don't hear from him. And the only time I hear from him is if I'm late on sending him the invoice, to be honest with you. Yeah. Hey, it's the 3rd or the 4th, just letting you know I haven't sent the invoice, if I'm overseas or something like that, because I haven't automated that one. But it's a different kettle of fish. And this is why I'm so interested in having you on as well, just because we're so fixed on residential property, right? And we have been for so long. I know I have been, and most of the people that I hang around with too do residential, and property development. And I've got one mate who's not mentored me, but basically I've been watching him, right, in the commercial space, and he just keeps buying and buying and buying and buying, to the point now where a friend of his is a commercial developer. But what they do is they do some new stuff, but they're experts in buying old commercial tenancies. So 15, 16, 25 units, and renovating them to the point now where all they do is ring him and say, hey, we're doing this one. There's 18. We want to sell 15. And he's got a big finance broking business, and he's got a big Rolodex, and he just calls his mates and goes, hey, there's another one. And he literally takes all 15. So there's not even any agent fees at the same time.
Yeah.
And they just keep buying. And it's such an interesting model.
Yeah. Look, in Australia, you're right. Everyone's programmed to go residential. And there's all these enablers out there that push it, like, from mortgage brokers. And it's the best way for someone in lower middle income class to go into that next level, because you can leverage a little bit amount of money. But the problem now is yields are getting way too low, especially versus the current interest rates. Like, even if rates come down 1.5%, like, it's still not adding up. And that's the problem. So you're there only for growth, and you suffer along the way. And that's the problem.
Yields are, they're not as good, but also property taxes are going up as well, like especially in places like Melbourne.
Yeah.
So the property taxes are just rising.
So this is something I've been talking about for quite a while. There's a huge political risk in the next 10 years for Australia that no one is accounting for. And that is when the voter base shifts from wanting to buy property to knowing they're going to be forever tenants, because they're going to vote tenant-friendly policies in. So more left-wing, socialist type. That's the reality of the world. Like, you see it in Europe. You see it, like, mature economies tend to go that way in many, many parts of the world. So, as we go into that space, there's going to be more reason for, political decision makers to go, well, let's give tenants the ability to never get kicked out, or you can't raise them more than $50 a week, or the land tax issue down in Victoria. It's going to significantly lower growth rates. That's the end result, because if your rents don't go up, you're going to be capped for growth. So that everyone quoting, this market's grown so well for the last 40 years. It's not the equivalent to the next 40 years.
And we talk about this all the time. At the last 40 years, the number one thing that has happened in the last 40 years is interest rates have dropped from 20% down to 0.
Yeah.
And we are potentially, and this is my view, and you can give your thoughts on it as well, because we talk about it often. My view is that we are moving into a secular environment where interest rates are going to rise over the next 10 to 15, 20 years. And they'll have little dips back, but effectively we're going the other way.
Yeah. Well, look, and no one knows. That's the trouble with it. So if that happens, yeah, it's big problems. Like something else that happened in the last 40 years, the two big other things that I think about straight away is, well, investors started investing in the market. They didn't really do that, not on volume, like 40 years ago. Women entered the workforce. So you got two incomes now servicing every loan.